guys, it's Kevin in my review for White Boy Rick. And what White Boy Rick is essentially about is we center on the true story of Richard Wershaw Jr., who in the 1980s, he lived in this, like, predominantly, black-type neighborhood. Almost everyone there was either colored or they were Asian or something like that, and basically, he gets involved with this gang, initially to become this informant for the FBI, but eventually, things get really crazy, and he starts to get way too involved with them, and all of this happens at the age of 15, and that's really all I'm going to say. So, White Boy Rick, I was really excited for this film. I thought that the cast here looked really great. The story is not one that I am really familiar with, but it seemed like a really interesting story. I really love films like this where it focuses on, this sort of like, where it's like this sort of like gang and how someone, just outsider gets involved with it and really the replications of that. I think there's a lot of interesting, the ramifications. I think there's a lot of interesting places you can go with that story, and I heard Richard Wershaw Jr.'s story was very interesting, and I'm sure it is. It's just this film isn't very interesting. It's not that this film is bad, it's just this film in general feels very messy. It doesn't really feel like it has much of a focus, and we're just getting into it right now, starting off with the cast. Now, I'll just say right now, the cast here is easily the best thing about this film. I think everyone really does hold it together quite well. Richie Merritt, let's just talk about him, because he blew me away in this film. I really loved him as the character of Rick. I think he's a very interesting, he's a really great range to him, and considering this is someone who is a unknown actor, the range that he has in this movie, I thought was really surprising. He goes to some really great places, he has some really great scenes here, and I really love what he did here. And when you factor Matthew McConaughey into it as well as his father, also named Rick, I thought was honestly really interesting. I really love the dynamic between these two. You can see that Rick is someone who he's always looking out for his son. He's always trying to make sure that, his son is on the right path. He really does care about his family, and I really did love the scenes between these two. Some of the best scenes in the movie are just these two interacting, and I thought both of them did a really great job here. And as far as the rest of the cast goes, everyone else does a really good job. Powley actually really impressed me as his sister Dawn. I really did like her in the film. I thought she had some really harrowing scenes, which I'll get into with the writing, but I really did like where they ended up taking her. Jennifer Jason Leigh is very good here. Brian Tyree Henry continues the streak that he's on. Bruce Dern and Piper Laurie give very good supporting performances. Really, everyone does do a very good job here. There are a lot of problems with this film, but the acting is really not one of them. But now let's get to the directing, which, again, the directing I don't really think is a huge problem. I think the tone is very well done. The film is very to the point. It doesn't have a, it has a very sort of dark, real feeling to it, and I think that the tone was very well done by Yann. He did a very good job of trying to tell this story, but also not trying to glorify what happened. He shows the mistakes that Rick made, and I think he did do a very good job with the directing overall. It's just a shame that the writing to this film is kind of a mess. And look, there's definitely a good movie in there somewhere, because there are a lot of things I do find very interesting about this film. I like the idea that Rick gets involved, with this gang, and all this stuff sort of happens to him from it. I do think that is a very interesting story overall, and the effect that this has on him and his family, I did actually think was quite tragic, and they definitely did a very good job, I think, of getting you into that dynamic overall. And there are some really good parts of the story. Like, I really loved everything going on with Dawn's character. Dawn is someone who, she's so involved with this gang and things like that, that she starts resorting to drugs, and it's a very saddening scene, seeing this drug use that she's going through. It's very hard to watch at points, and I really did like how they didn't try to gloss over that. There are some really sad scenes of her and this very, her obviously very addicted to, I believe it was heroin, and I thought most of this movie was going to be them trying to break her out of you know, out of this gang and try to get her on a good path. And maybe that's the reason why Rick starts to get involved with all this stuff. You know, he's doing it for his family, but we really don't get to see a lot of it. We really don't get to see a lot of the stuff that Rick is really doing. And it's mainly because the film, it feels very, very disjointed in that sense. It's one of those films that's constantly moving and jumping through different years, and it just doesn't really work all that much. I really was not, like I said, all that invested in the story, simply because I just didn't really feel like I got to know these characters all that much. And I know obviously they were real people, but I didn't really feel like I got to know who Richard Warshaw Jr. really was. Honestly, the whole time I was watching the movie, there's this documentary called White Boy, and I honestly was thinking, I really wish I watched that before this. I think I would have enjoyed this film more. And the fact that I have to watch a documentary to get more information from Rick that I didn't get in this film, that just shows you where this film really does fail, in my opinion, is that we really did not get to know who these people really were. The only character that felt like a full-fledged character to me was Dawn, because you really did get to know who she was, but other than that, we still don't really get to know a lot about her. We hear a lot about these things, but we don't really get to see a lot of it, and I do think that really does bring the film down a lot. The gang in general is not focused on at all. They always feel like this plot point. They don't really feel like they have this point in the film. Like the previous film I reviewed, Mandy, you know, you really got to know that cult. You got to see what they really were doing. You know, what's the reason they really needed Mandy? And that's not the case with White Boy Rick. We really only see them through the way that Rick does, and I was really hoping we get more of a inside look at them. And if anything, you just kind of feel like a fly on the wall. Like, you feel like you're really seeing things through Rick and you're following Rick, but you don't really get to see these, you know, gangsters and what they're really doing. And I do think that was a detriment to this film overall. I really do wish they would have focused on it a bit more, and unfortunately they just really didn't. And again, it is an interesting story. There is stuff that I did like here. You know, I like seeing Rick get really involved with them and buying them guns and supplying them with all these guns, and how this really starts to have an effect on him, how he kind of started, you know, becoming like a drug dealer. I mean, there's a lot of interesting things that they could have done with this story, but again, they just didn't really focus on them. They didn't realize, I think, the true potential that they really had, and I do think the film really does falter in that regard. The ending of the movie, you know, it's supposed to be very emotional, and you're supposed to feel a lot of emotion, and really, it's because of McConaughey and Merritt's chemistry. Like, these two really do sell it very well. You really do get a good look into, you know, you really do feel like they're adding more to their performances, and they're really the one thing from keeping me from not recommending this film. I do think they did a good job in their roles. I do think everyone does do a good job in their roles. It's just really, at the end of the day, there's not really a lot to talk about when it comes to this film, because the film does not really give you a lot to latch onto. It gives you ideas, and it gives you some things that could make a really good movie, but it doesn't want to take the time to really flesh them out, and I do think that's where this film really does falter there. The film is not even 2 hours long, and it honestly did drag quite a lot at points. The second act especially, I was honestly kind of bored during. I really was not into it a lot. The first and the third act, I will say I was into for the most part, but the second act, I really was not into at all. There's a lot of things that happen, and you're like, how did that happen? Like, I really did feel like the film, they didn't really do a lot of research into who Richard Warshaw Jr. really was, and I really wanted more of a look into that. The cinematography here is very good. You do get the feeling that we're in the 80s. The score definitely gives you that sense, and they do a very good job with that. And Max Richter did do a good job with the score, but again, it's just nothing really all that memorable. Ultimately, White Boy Rick is just a huge missed opportunity. There is some really great talent in this film. There are some really great ideas, but the film just never, I think, realized its true potential. And unfortunately, because of that, it just did not really give me a lot to latch onto. There were things that I really liked. I like getting into the drug addiction storyline and the effect this has on both, you know, Rick Jr. and Sr. I like getting into Rick getting involved with this gang, and like I said, you know, the consequences that he has with that. You know, I like getting to know who they were, but we really didn't get to know who these characters were. We really did not get that much of a look into them, and I really do think the film really did drop the ball when it comes to that. It's not a terrible film. It's a film that there were a lot of things that I did enjoy, but just overall, it's probably one of the most disappointing films of the entire year, honestly. The film had a lot of potential, but in the end, it just doesn't really do much for me. So, unfortunately, while there are a lot of things I do enjoy about White Boy Rick, I am going to give the film overall a C+. Like I said, it's a film that for sure is watchable. It's a film that I think you will get, I think, the bare minimum of the story. Like, there definitely is a story there, but there just isn't really that much going on other than a few things I mentioned, and I think they could have done a lot more with it. But that's really it for my review. Hope you guys enjoy. We'll see you guys in my next video, and I will see you guys for that. Okay, bye.